Good evening. Thank you all for coming. If you'd like to take your seats, we'll begin. I would like to thank all of you for coming out this lovely evening. Feels very much like Indian summer. We've had a great series of lectures related to the exhibitions this semester. We've gone from Victor Hugo to Pablo Picasso, and now Haddon Sundblom and Santa Claus and the history of Christmas. So this evening, our very own Elizabeth Peterson, the director of the museum here, will be speaking about hundreds and hundreds of years of history as they relate to the foundation of Christmas. Thank you, Elizabeth.
We like to stand on ceremony. Small birdie, small birdie. Gosh, when I decided to do this, I thought this won't be the scholarly lecture. This will be the lark. This will be fun. This will be frivolous. Whew, I could not have been more wrong. It'll be fun. But what we're going to do tonight is explore the history of Christmas, which is a holiday that had its origin 1,933 years ago. And I'm going to try to fly through those years with you, magically. You may be surprised by a few things you're going to hear tonight. Can everybody hear me, by the way? If I speak up? Speak up a little bit more? Okay, I can do that. Christmas was not originally a holiday for children. Christmas was a holiday celebrated by adults, and it was dangerous. It often involved home invasions and a lot of revelry and breaking the law. It was a little bit like a combination of Halloween and Carnival. Santa was not a kind, gentle fellow, kind of portly, the way we see him today, the Haddon Sundlboms that you're surrounded by. He was a stern fellow. He could have been dressed maybe in yellow or green. He was slim. He was very serious, and he was often depicted riding a white horse or maybe a goat. Christmas was banned in Puritan New England, probably because of the overindulgence in food and the revelry and the things that Puritans were not condoning. In the interest of full disclosure, I need to tell you that the H in my middle name stands for Holly, my mother's name, and that I was born on December 30th. I am a Christmas fanatic. I adore this season as much or more than the next person. My family incorporated traditions from our Swedish, English, and Irish ancestry. And like you, I have many cherished traditions. When other families would observe them, I would recognize them, but then there were things that were peculiar to us. Why did my mother put gold-covered chocolate coins in my stocking? Why did my father put presents in my shoes? Why were there stockings by the fire? Why did we bring a tree inside the house? And why does Santa have so many names anyway? Papa Noel and Father Christmas and Santa Claus and Kris Kringle. This evening you'll see that over centuries, the tradition of Christmas evolved to include elements of the New Testament, the Norse gods, the observation of the winter solstice, and the good deeds of a bishop of ancient Greece. It's a story written by thousands of people, and like any good story, it contains both facts and whimsy. I'd like to point out to you, speaking of whimsy, that this is a beautiful illustration of Father Christmas by the English illustrator Arthur Rackham. Next slide. And this is an amazing drawing by a Spanish artist, Murillo, from the 17th century. It's the angel approaching Joseph in a dream. So we'll begin at the beginning with the start of the Common Era, the Common Calendar, some 20 years after Jesus died on the cross, and his followers were documenting his life and work. The earliest writing included in the canon of the New Testament would be Paul's epistle to the Thessalonians, and it didn't concern the nativity at all. The earliest apostles were extremely concerned about the end of days. They believed that the second coming was imminent. It wasn't until 80 AD that Matthew wrote about the baby Jesus. In the Gospel according to Matthew, the Infancy Narratives in chapter 1 and 2 are regarding the virgin birth and the visit by the three kings, or Magi. In Matthew 1, verses 23 and 24, it reads, "Look, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. When Joseph awoke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him and took her as his wife." It was also through the writings of Matthew that we learned about the fulfillment of 5 Hebrew Bible prophecies about the Messiah. 1, that he would be the son of David. 2, that he was born in Bethlehem. 3, about the angelic warning to Joseph about Herod's wrath. 4, the flight into Egypt and the massacre of the holy innocents as Herod tried to find the Christ child. And 5, that they would reside in Nazareth. Slide 3. In Matthew 2, verses 1 and 2, it reads, "In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, Magi came to Jerusalem asking, 'Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star in the east and have come to pay him homage.'" The gifts they gave him had particular meanings for the time. You see here in this incredible Ravenna mosaic of 526 AD, the three wise men, Balthazar, Melchior, and Gaspar, which I have to tell you I've always thought would make wonderful names for chocolates that I could sell during the Christmas season. Love to bake and cook. So in those times, the gifts that they had given, the gold, the frankincense, and myrrh, had very specific meanings. Gold was valued as a currency, as it still is today, the gold standard. Frankincense was used in royal ceremonies, and myrrh was used in embalming, so that was probably a symbolic foreshadowing by Matthew of the death and resurrection of Christ. In the biblical book of Numbers, there was a prophecy that a star shall rise out of Jacob. And since the patriarch Jacob's other name was Israel, a star rising out of Jacob could symbolize Jesus emerging from the history of Israel. Again, in researching this incredible story and trying to condense it down to an hour, there are so many references to the star, astronomy, astronomers. You can find an incredible number of references to a comet at that time, to an eclipse at that time, to the planets aligning, if you're interested. It's out there. So in addition to the virgin birth and the Magi, the Gospel of Matthew includes the genealogy of Jesus, the escape into Egypt, the massacre of the innocents, and the return to Egypt. That's a little blurry. I included the actual site on the right so you could get a better sense of I think it might, oh, no, you got it a little bit better. So you can see what it looks like in situ in this beautiful capella. Let's see. So this would be in Palermo in Sicily under the Normans, this beautiful mosaic. There are only 2 chapters in the New Testament that contain what we call the Infancy Narratives. Now, again, if you want to research this more, as I do, there are apocryphal Gospels that are not part of the canon of the New Testament that contain a tremendous wealth of information about the infancy, about the nativity and the youth of Jesus. So the first is Matthew, and the second Gospel is according to Luke, which includes the birth and the shepherds and angels, and also the announcement of the birth of John the Baptist, Mary visiting Elizabeth, and several other passages that relate to the early life of Christ. In Luke 2, verses 4 through 7, it reads, "Joseph went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. And he went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged and who was expecting a child. And while they were there, the time came for her to deliver her first child. She gave birth to a firstborn son, wrapped him in bands of cloth, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them at the inn." However, in some of the earliest depictions, you see Mary and Joseph and the baby in a cave. Sometimes it's a cave, and sometimes it's a manger. Sometimes it's an inn, not an inn, but a cave-like structure rather than a stall. Oh, and it's also interesting to point out the Stella Partit Solum Rosa, Florum Forma Decorum. I don't speak Latin, I'm not quite sure what it says, but Google tells me that means something like star from the sun in the form of a beautiful rose, which reminds me of a certain hymn. Probably reminds you too. Next slide. It's an incredible image by William Blake. Not my favorite artist, but I really felt it captured the dazzling experience that the shepherds must have had. So in Luke 2, verses 8 through 14, "In that region there were shepherds living in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. Then an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid, for see, I am bringing you good news of great joy for all the people. To you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign for you. You will find the child wrapped in bands of cloth and lying in a manger." And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace to men of good will." Next slide. Oh, amazing image by Lebrun. Showing the manger, again, not looking like what it probably was, which was a bit of a hovel, but more like a palace. When the angels had left them, this is Luke 2:15 through 16, when the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let us now go unto Bethlehem, and see this thing which has taken place, which the Lord has made known to us." So they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the child lying in the manger. And you can see the shepherds approaching and the heavenly host. Next slide. Luke 2, verses 17 to 20. When they saw this, they made known what had been told them about this child, and all who heard them were amazed at what the shepherds told them. But Mary treasured all these words and pondered them in her heart. The shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all they had heard and seen, as it had been told to them. And George de la Tour, in his typical manner, is using the flame as a symbol of the light of the world, Christ entering the world. Next. Let's see. So now, we have almost all the elements of the Nativity as we know it today. We have Joseph and Mary, the virgin birth, the Christ child, the manger, the star and the Magi, their gifts and the shepherds, the flock and the heavenly host. But why are the ox and the ass always present? I always wondered this. And they're always together. In Isaiah 1, there is a quote, "The ox knows its owner and the donkey its master's crib, but Israel does not know. My people do not understand." Some theologians have taken this and interpreted it to mean that the coming of the Messiah would be met with skepticism, and it may also be interpreted, the use of the ox and the ass, as representing the ceremonially clean animal side by side with the ceremonially unclean animal. In other words, Jew and Gentile, side by side, confirming the birth of Christ. Next slide. Oh, I should mention too, go back. This is an incredible place. If you ever have the good fortune to go to Padua in Italy, the blue that you see in the Arena Chapel is from ground lapis lazuli. So if you can imagine what it's like to walk into this space, it glows. It's astounding. And this doesn't do it justice. The blue is more like what you see on the right. Next slide. This is another panel by Giotto in Padua. And again, it's from 1304 to 6. It's fresco, by the way. Let's see. So why December 25th? As we'll see, both the celebration of St. Nicholas Day and the Feast of Saturnalia in December had some bearing on the selection of December as the month of the Holy Birth. The author Joseph Kelly, who wrote an incredible book called Origins of Christmas, suggests that December 25th was selected because the spring equinox, which fell on March 25th in the Roman calendar, was the time of the conception of Christ, who would have been born 9 months later, December 25th. It's a compelling argument. So there are many different things, both mystical, factual, that are leading us to December. And by the way, I found no mention of camels in the New Testament or anywhere. I have no idea why they're brought in, other than they were a means of transportation in that part of the world. Next slide. We now turn from the Nativity to the birth of a boy named Nicholas, who was born circa 275 AD in Patera on the southeastern Lycian coast in what was ancient Greece and is modern-day Turkey. Nicholas's parents died of the plague, and he was orphaned when he was still in his early teens. His parents, Theophanes and Nonna, had prospered during his childhood, so he received a large inheritance. He went to live with his uncle, who was an abbot in a monastery, and he studied and continued to grow in his faith and Christianity. Through a miraculous sign, Nicholas, who had not yet become a priest, was selected to become the bishop of Myra. which was a metropolis of about 50,000 people in the 2nd century and was a very important city in Lycia. This is a beautiful Russian icon of St. Nicholas, and it was made about 1294. Next slide. There are many, many stories of St. Nicholas's good deeds in his lifetime, particularly his charity toward children and those in need. And in this scene, which is a panel from a predella of an altarpiece painted around 1433 in the monastery San Niccolò of Caravaggio in Florence, you see St. Nicholas bringing back to life 3 young men who had been, brace yourselves, slaughtered and pickled during a time of famine. So he's resuscitated the 3 youths. Let's see, where am I? Next slide. I'm sorry?
That's what the barrels?
They were pickled in barrels.
In barrels.
Yeah, by an innkeeper during a famine. And he brought them back to life. And here is St. Nicholas, again performing another miracle, an earlier miracle, an act of charity in which he provides a dowry for 3 poor maidens. These 3 women he knew in his village, they didn't have enough money for a dowry. Without enough money for a dowry, it's likely they would have been sold into slavery. They would have been destitute in any event. So he, again, has performed an act of charity and done so silently. And so the minute I found out about this, I understood about my gold coins in the stocking. There's one tradition. Next. Having been born in a seafaring community and the bishop of a coastal city, St. Nicholas was not only the patron saint of orphans, of children, and of the poor, he was patron saint of sailors. And there were many, many images of him that were painted or created by artists in coastal cities. This is a beautiful cameo of glass paste, which was made around either the 12th or 13th century in Venice. Next. This is another Venetian work by an artist named Villacellio Tiziano, otherwise known as Titian, with St. Nicholas looking a little bit more like the Santa Claus that we know today. He looks a little bit more benevolent, a little less stern. Of course he's wearing red and white. He was always wearing red and white, as any bishop would have. At his feet are 3 balls, which are kind of difficult to see here, but you can see them in the larger image. And those represent the gold bags of coins for the dowries. And the young man represents the youths, the young man holding the mitre is representing the youths. Next slide. So here he is again looking a little bit more like Father Christmas, again holding the bags of coins. He is wearing, again, his bishop's cloaks of red and white, and he's holding his staff. Under Roman Emperor Diocletian, who ruthlessly persecuted Christians, Bishop Nicholas suffered for his faith, as did many, and he was exiled and imprisoned. It was said that the prisons were so full of bishops, priests, and deacons that there was no room for murderers, thieves, or robbers. After his release, Nicholas attended the Council of Nicaea in 325. He died December 6th, we think it was 343 AD. December 6th, or it might be December 19th in the Julian calendar. So again, here we have another event surrounding December. Let's see, he's buried in his cathedral church in Myra, and it's still there, it exists. You can visit Santa Claus if you like, to this day. By the year 450, churches in Asia Minor and Greece were being named in honor of him, and by 800 he was officially recognized as a saint by the Eastern Catholic Church. By the 1200s, December 6th was celebrated as Bishop Nicholas Day in France and many other areas of Europe. Next slide. Okay. This is an unbelievably beautiful painting by Jan Steen. It would have been painted around 1665 or 68. Oil on panel. In the Netherlands, St. Nicholas Day was celebrated the same way for centuries. Good children received gifts from the saint. This little girl in the foreground, for instance, has a bucket of treats. She had so many treats that they fell out of her shoe. And the little boy at the left really, really did get, maybe not coal, but switches in his stocking. This was not an idle threat made by parents. It happened. Next slide. So now we have the life and the good deeds of St. Nicholas, as well as elements of the New Testament and the Infancy Narratives. As Christianity continued to spread, it incorporated pagan traditions of various regions. Odin, also called Woden, is a principal member of the Aesir, or the major group of the Norse pantheon of gods. He is a supreme deity and the eldest of all gods in the Nordic pantheon. He's associated with war, battle, victory, and death, but also of wisdom, shamanism, magic, poetry, prophecy, the hunt, and travel. Has many sons, and one that you may have heard of is Thor, the god of thunder. This depiction of Odin shows him as a traveler with a staff, reminiscent of the bishop's staff, with a hat that looks to me, for all the world, like a fisherman's cap, and a bit like the Santa we know, but with none of his goodwill. I would not like that fellow to show up at my house on Christmas. Next slide. These are medieval depictions of Odin, and you can see that he is closely connected with, again, I mentioned a white horse, with a white horse called Sleipnir, S-L-E-I-P-N-I-R, which looks to me a little bit like the word for sleigh. It's actually Old Norse for slipper or slippery. Sleipnir was an 8-legged magical horse, a gray steed that could journey on both land and sea and traveled the world. Let's see, the notion of travel by magic, the number 8, the name of Sleipnir or Slethi, may have all contributed to the story of Santa with his magical night ride, 8 reindeer, and a sleigh. Just as a little aside, I don't think this has any connection to Christmas, but the 2 ravens, his familiars, were Hugin and Munin, thought and memory. I mean, you could draw some kind of a connection to Christmas there. Next. Ostia Antiqa is a port city in ancient Rome, and in this slide you see a depiction of Poseidon. He's here. And he's in his chariot, which is drawn by 4 horses with fishtails, hippocampi. Again, we've got the introduction of kind of a magical means of travel, and now a chariot or a sledge. Next. This engraving, and I know it says Fox, but I cannot for the life of me find the actual reference to the artist. So if any of you find it, let me know.